ES6 template literals have completely changed the way we create and manage strings in JavaScript. To best illustrate the power of template literals, let's first take a look at string creation in classic JavaScript. Let's come over to the code. Let's create a few variables. We'll say first name of John, last name Doe. So we got a guy named John Doe. John's 30 years old and is a professional developer. Now, if we wanted to construct a full string out of these variables, we would use a process called concatenation, where we first establish our variable and then set up some double quotes and then start creating our string. So we'll say, hello, my name is John Doe, right? And in order to do that, we need a few things. First, we need to establish our first concatenated string, right, which is this first name value. But then we need to close that off and introduce our second variable, right? So between these double quotes here, we needed to close that off because we actually have a space in between those. So we're saying, hello, my name is first name, space, last name, and then full stop period. And then we're saying I am, we're going to say age here, right? I am, so we concatenate age, space, blank years old, right? And work as a, and we come to our final concatenated string, which is the profession, right? But we're not done. We need to close off this sentence with a full stop period, right? So all of that gives us a full sentence. If we go ahead and print that out, we see, hello, my name is John Doe. I am 30 years old and work as a developer. But we went through a lot to get there, right? There was a lot of syntax that we needed to add in order to pull that off. And you can imagine the longer this gets, the more variables we have to deal with, the more confusing this is for developers to read. Well, template literals makes this a lot cleaner. Let's take a look at this same thing using template literals. So we'll go ahead and stand up some variables. We'll use const instead of var, obviously. So we'll say a first name John, last name Doe, age 30, and the profession is a developer. But now when we set up our string, our message string, we introduce backticks. That's how you start a template literal in ES6. Instead of using double quotes or single quotes, use backticks. So we'll start kind of the same way where we say, hello, my name is. But check this out. Instead of doing any special syntax, all we do is pop the token in directly, right? So we use the $, open curly brace, the name of the variable we want to supply, and then we close it off. And that's it. And then we continue with that, right? So now we have a space followed by the last name, right? Period. I am, age, years old, and work as a, whatever the profession is, period. Now, compared to the first one, this looks a lot cleaner. If we go ahead and save this and print it out, we can see that we get the exact same result for a fraction of the syntax. And it is way more human readable, right? It just looks like we have token values in place instead of this crazy concatenation, which breaks the string apart. So really good stuff, a really clean way for us to handle strings going forward. There's also multi-line support. Template literals interpret new line characters and tab characters as natural as, say, a word processor would. No special formatting or syntax required. So let's take a look at that. We'll make this a little smaller. And let's go ahead and create a multi-line string. We'll introduce our backticks. And let's add some hard returns in between there. And let's actually start creating some lines, right? So we'll say this is a multi-line string. And without doing any special coding or adding any special syntax, we can see that that actually shows up as a multi-line string. If I were to remove these tab characters here, and let's say I put this all the way back at the beginning of the line and save that, if I play that, we can see that now there's no more tabbing as well, right? So it respects that as well. So imagine you're dealing with very lengthy HTML chunks of text. Now you won't have to worry about the odd formatting that we used to have to worry about with classic JavaScript. We can actually view this as regular HTML strings. You can imagine you see something like this, right, where you have a div, and then here you have maybe h1, right, and then maybe another div, or maybe you have a p tag. But imagine reading this, right? This is extremely clean. It looks really good. And then look what is printed out on the other side, right? We actually get that formatting that we would expect as well. So this makes string management a lot easier and easier to read for developers going forward. And finally, there's a more advanced feature that's been introduced called tagged templates. Tag templates allow you to process template literals with a function known as a tag function. So let's take a look at that. Let's say we have a username of Alice, and let's say Alice is 30, and we want to call this function. Let's say there's a random function called myTag function. So to invoke a tag function, instead of supplying the parentheses to a function, like we would normally pass here, we would do this and then pass some parameters. Instead of doing that, you pass a template literal to it directly. Now, the method signature for a tag template is pretty important, right? So obviously this is a standard method declaration or function declaration. You can also use const arrow functions here if you wanted to. I'm just going to use a normal function. It requires two parameters though. The first parameter is an array of strings. It's the array of any string that is leading up to a dynamic token, right? So $ open curly brace variable close curly brace. I call those tokens. Anything leading up to that is part of a string array, and you'll see in a second that they're separated as such. And then the next one here is a array of the values, right? The things that you are passing in dynamically. And you'll notice there's an ellipses in front of the word values. That's using something called the rest operator. We haven't talked about that yet. We will be talking about that in a future video. All you need to know for now is that this allows us to dynamically pass in parameters and trust that they're going to be processed no matter how many we have here. So here what we'll do is we'll just console log the values here. I'm going to go ahead and save. I just want you guys to see what this output looks like. Let's clear this out. So here you can see we have the first array and the second array, right? The first array is the strings array. So like I said before, everything up to the dynamic piece gets separated into its own array index, right? So username : space is one index, and then everything after the closing bracket and up to the next token is also an array item. So here we'll have comma, right, space, age, : right, and then space, right, and then a final space. This is really cool. And then finally we have the actual array, the one that I think is more important and valuable, which is the values array. So this is an array in order of the tokens that were used in the string itself. There's a lot of cool things you can do with this. They can be used for custom string interpolation and manipulation, localization, custom formatting, security escaping, all kinds of stuff, right? So let's recap the benefits of template literals. First off, there's improved readability and maintainability of code, especially for complicated string construction. There's also simplified string concatenation and formatting. And of course, there's enhanced support for multi-line strings, right? So bottom line, template literals are the new standard for working with strings in JavaScript, one of the most powerful tools for nearly any type of string manipulation work.